Welcome everyone to track 8 at IASEAI 2026 on protecting vulnerable and underserved AI users. I'm Mario Günther, Junior Professor at Panthéon-Sorbonne, and it is my pleasure to chair the session. Our first group of speakers is already on the stage. We are very lucky to have Gemma Golden-Clevel, President of the International Association of Algorithmic Auditors. She was initially scheduled to speak at one of yesterday's track sessions, but her flight, as so many, was cancelled, and so we are very grateful she managed to make it and give a talk here that will set the stage for the session. The other speakers are Asmaa Fraihi, a PhD student at the Computer Science Lab of École Polytechnique, Zeynep Tufekci, the Henry G. Bryan Professor of Sociology and Public Affairs at Princeton University, Nick Judd, a lead research engineer at the Digital Safety Research Institute, and Sachin Pense, assistant professor at the University of California in San Francisco. It is my pleasure to give you the word, Gemma.
Thank you so much. I'm quite literally bombing this panel, appearing at the last minute. Thank you to the organizers for the flexibility after a canceled flight. So I'm here representing the International Association of Algorithmic Auditors. And why does that make sense on a panel on vulnerable and underrepresented users? Well, initially it didn't because I was in another panel, but it actually does. The reason why we talk about vulnerable and underrepresented users in AI is because we have a huge power problem, a power imbalance problem. The way that the AI that we have around us is and how it's tested has been defined up until now by the corporations developing those systems. And so oftentimes we don't even have the tools to understand how those systems work. And those that are mostly affected by those systems, often vulnerable populations with whom we test many of these technologies, do not have a voice or mechanisms to understand how those systems work on them. There's lots of ways to tackle this, and I think that this whole conference is about safe and ethical AI. How can we intervene in effective, efficient ways to make sure that we rebalance those power relations, that we make sure that we have the possibility to inspect those AI systems, understand how they work, and make sure that people are protected when interacting with AI. Well, that's exactly what the International Association of Algorithmic Auditors tries to do. It's a trade organization, and historically trade organizations have been crucial not only in shaping policy, but also enforcing policy. So the work of trade organizations and professionals has often shaped how then something is regulated. And so the idea of the IAAA is that a group of us, people that have been auditing AI systems, inspecting AI systems from lots of different perspectives, get together to define what a good audit is and what transparency means when we're dealing with those AI systems. The IAAA was started a couple of years ago by people like Shay Brown, Kathy O'Neill, Ruman Chowdhury, people that have been involved for a long, long time in trying to open the black box of AI. And since then, we've grown to be an organization of over 100 members that is trying to define exactly that. How do we make AI accountable? And how do we also make sure that those auditing AI are accountable themselves? How do we build the rules of the profession so that whoever who inspects one of those systems has the credibility of proper training and proper support and proper guidelines on how this is done? And so in that effort, we've already published, and you can find on the website, a body of knowledge, a code of conduct for AI auditors, and we're about to launch the first scheme to individually accredit AI auditors. So basically say who is allowed to claim to be an AI auditor based on a combination of theory, access to training, and we have alliances with IASEAI, Babel, the AIPP, and a lot of organizations that are giving training in this space, but also practice. We want people that have had actual practice in opening up the insights of those systems and seeing what it is that you find when you deal with the complexity of AI systems in production. So not just at the model layer, not just at the pre-training layer, not just before something hits the market, but also after something's in the market. How do we monitor what is happening? How do we make sure that we identify and minimize risks such as bias and fairness, of course, but also security risks, environmental risks, risks related to reliability, hallucination, misinformation. How do we do all that, and how do we do all that in ways that are robust and credible for anyone who is listening? So in a few weeks, we'll have that out. We have several working groups working on precisely this. How do we build standards on how these systems need to be audited? And what is the standard for the transparency of the organizations developing those AI systems to make sure precisely that we build product safety from day one? But as I said at the beginning, what we all share here is a willingness and a commitment to make AI safer for everyone. That will not happen just with one organization. However, I think that the IEEE is amazing, and its members are amazing. We need a lot of groups and entities and people doing similar work, doing red teaming, doing the audits that we're going to be hearing from the other presenters here, working inside the companies to open up the things that they are doing. We need a movement to open up the black box of AI. I hope that you will join us in that effort. If you want to join, I'm done. If you want to join the IEEE, you have the QR code there. If you want to contribute, if you have work around this space, we're open to hear it. If you're a funder and want to help us make progress, please do reach out to me. And thank you so much for the time and space. Thanks.
Thank you, Gemma. Next up is Asmaa. The stage is yours.
So, since the Cambridge Analytica scandal, we've been hearing a lot of concerns about psychological targeting, which is the idea that we can tailor messages to internal traits that we have, such as personality, that shape how we think, how we feel, and even how we process information. Today, I'm going to present to you a work on how this form of targeting can influence ad delivery. So, to begin, when it comes to persuasive communication, instead of tailoring messages to superficial characteristics such as age or gender, psychological targeting tells us that we can do this for deeper traits. So you can, for example, tailor a message to introverts, or people who are open to experiences, or people who are emotionally driven. And this can make the message feel more relevant and more persuasive to the recipient. Now, you can see immediately how this can be very relevant in advertising, but it can also be used in other contexts, such as in political communication, in informational campaigns. So here's the thing. If you are an advertiser and you do happen to have a message that is tailored to introverts, for example, you cannot go on platforms for advertising like Meta and Google and instruct the platform to show your message to introverts. Or instruct the platform to show your message to people who are emotionally vulnerable. These are not options that exist on these platforms. This to us raised a deeper question. Even if the advertiser cannot select, for example, introverts as a target, could a message that is tailored to introverts still find its way to the intended audience? So to explain how this can happen, I'm going to simplify how advertising works on platforms like Meta. You go in as an advertiser and you want your messages to be seen by a particular group. So for example, you choose women who are aged 25 to 34 and who are interested in fitness. This is your audience selection. However, once your ad campaign is live, it is actually the platform that ultimately controls exposure and decides who are the users who are going to actually see your ad. And to do that, they, of course, rely on multitudes of signals, of which we have behavioral signals. So interaction data, browsing history, browsing activity. And they use this data to predict who are the users who are going to find your messages relevant, who are going to engage, who are going to click, who are going to buy your products. So in this process of optimization, there is a risk in theory that the system might learn who are the users who prefer energetic framing, who are the users who prefer calm messaging. And in doing so, it can favor messages that are aligned with these traits. And this is exactly what we wanted to test. So we start off by constructing audiences that consist of users who share a specific personality or a specific psychological trait. In our case, we tested this with the personality trait with extroverts and introverts. And then we target them with two types of ads that are aligned with their traits and ads that are misaligned with their traits. And we sort of put these ads in competition against each other. So we have identical setups, and we only vary the framing, which is aligned versus misaligned. And we wanted to measure which are the ads that are going to be, quote unquote, preferred by the system. So to construct our audiences, which is the core of the experiment, we tested two methods. The first we call psychometric profiling, where we administered standardized surveys to assess the personality of the users and then mapped them to ad audiences we used in the experiment. And the second is behavioral profiling, where we built our audiences from users who interacted with content that is aligned with a specific personality trait. So to summarize our results, we found that across experiments, the ads that were misaligned with the personality traits of the target audience were being disfavored during ad delivery. Now, this does not mean that there is necessarily a malicious design or that the platform is trying to exploit and model personality traits or any type of psychological trait for that matter. What we see here is that AI-based systems that optimize for engagement by relying on these sort of behavioral signals may learn to favor content that is aligned with our internal traits. And this is just an unexpected result from this process of optimization. Thank you so much for your attention, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate.
Thank you, Asmaa. Up next is Zeynep.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to start by introducing my research team. We're here with 3 more people. They're sitting in the second row there: Aslan Bilimer, Peter Kyrgyz, and Ben Havruluk. Peter and Ben are from Princeton, working in our research team. Aslan is a high school student, so the future is here, so the young ones have to be involved too. And I want to talk about, we have, Sherry Fang, who's not here, and Sam Peach, who started a version of this project in his basement, in his free time, to see what some socially relevant benchmarks would look like. And we took it and systematized it, which goes to the point Alondra Nelson was making in her amazing talk this morning, is that it took someone in Australia doing this after their full-time job as a hobby to actually measure one of the most important consequences of social chatbots at scale. And so that's a choice. So we have a proof of concept of a certain kind of audit, but we want to highlight, once again, what's not being measured. We hear a lot of talk about, if AI says this, AI says that, what does it mean? If they say they want to survive, if they say they don't want to be shut down, what does it mean? There's not enough attention on the fact that we have a social machine, a talking machine, a speaking machine that can speak at scale to billions of people at once, and that is conversational and can produce human language with all its complexity and nuance. This is amazing, and this was not expected. And we're not really reacting. The alien speaking machines have landed, and we're kind of not reacting to this. There's too much attention on Math Olympiad. My math geek side loves that stuff, but that's more about the middle school fantasies and hopes of tech company people, and I will say I was one of the I love that stuff. It's not really that important. There's 8th graders who do better math than me. It's not going to change the world. Speaking to 1 billion people in a social manner, that is extremely relevant, and that's not being measured. Auditing LLMs for social impact is hard because some of the consequences, when you hear something like a lawsuit because a teenager committed suicide after an extensive conversation, that may fall under product liability, and that may be something you can sue in court. But if an LLM is convincing people that their misplaced anxiety is in fact rational, so they skip a very crucial job interview, feeling like superintelligence told me to do so. At the scale of billions, that kind of nudge is extremely consequential. And this, what I just gave was a real example from some of the things. So, we measured ChatGPT 4 and ChatGPT 5.0. I am going to have a QR code with a link to our paper at the end. And we measured 4 conversation pairs, and we set up Kimi to be like a user, which is a LLM, and interacted with it. So crucially, people test LLMs using API, which is the automated system. We said, let's not take the company's word for it that the API and the chat interface, which is how everybody uses, is the same. So we laboriously tested using 20 Princeton undergraduate army in real life conditions. And we looked at their behaviors. So big first takeaway, the API does not give you the same result as the web interface. The API test, which is how every audit is done, this is the first study we know of that has used the actual conditions, does not give you the actual results. You're testing cars, and the test car they give you is not the car they're selling to the billions of people. So, and it took like us and 20 undergrads to uncover this. Once again, this is a choice not to do this. And what we found is that there's change. ChatGPT 5 was really different than ChatGPT 4.0, which had created a lot of crises. It had turned on memory. There were some high-scale cases, which shows you that the companies do respond. ChatGPT 5 had less mean behaviors than ChatGPT 4.0. The companies do make changes. We found that they have similar rates of help referral, but how they refer is very different. ChatGPT 4 makes a referral in the beginning and goes on. ChatGPT 5 does it at the end. So it's very important to measure things over time. We found that the same API endpoint, completely different results over time without any changes being announced. As Alondra said in our talk, you cannot take the scorecard they give you, you cannot trust their words. And we have to, and sometimes like they were better, sometimes they were worse, but there was a lot of negative behavior even in the improved version of ChatGPT 5. So even the improved version over time is highly consequential in terms of encouraging delusional thinking, encouraging conspiracies, and encouraging harmful discussions. So thank you very much. We did not want to do this like we don't want to become the auditors of the tech companies, but it's, I think, really telling where we are, that somebody's past, part-time project in a hobby and us in Princeton was the way we could get to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeynep. Up next is Nick. So up next is Nick.
Yes, hello, that is me. Hi, so I'm Nick Judd. I'm from the UL Research Institute, Digital Safety Research Institute. We're a safety science organization, and I'm here presenting joint work that we did with Sensio University, which is a marriage and family therapy training program. So they train marriage and family therapists. We started collaborating because, as Zeynep said, there have been a number of reports of incidents that implicate large language models and the chatbots that they power in mental health crises. Chatbots have allegedly responded inappropriately to expressions of suicide risk, either failing to help or even, according to reports, actively supporting plans to commit suicide. So it's clear that what chatbots should not do when they're getting signals of suicide risk from a user, but what should they do? This is a bigger question. As we've heard at this conference, policymakers and the public are addressing these questions, these kind of normative questions, and they need tools and methods to answer those questions. And these tools and methods need to be flexible. As we learn more about use cases and emergent risks, we need to be able to adapt and improve our assessment methodologies. What I'm here to present today is our effort to help that process of improving our assessment methodology. So the core of this work revolves around proposed guidelines for a minimally adequate response to signals of mental health risk. These kind of 5 criteria you see up here are coming from guidelines that our colleagues at Sentio developed. They proposed, they have adapted it from the clinical literature, and then they actually published this code book is a publication of theirs in their literature. So we adapted this code book and we designed a study around it to recruit therapists to help us assess the likelihood that one element that we're putting out as a system under test, what's the likelihood that in response to a signal of suicide risk in a prompt, that model is going to be aligned with these criteria. And we're focused on this in 2 ways. First, in response to each of 7 signals of suicide risk, which is again taken from the clinical literature by my colleagues. And second, over the course of a conversation, as Zeynep said, we're very interested in, and it's important to keep track of, how the behavior of a model will change over the course of a conversation. And in this study, kind of the best we can do is operationalize what happens as the number of signals of risk in the conversation goes up. Because ours is a kind of a static setup. There's each of 5 kind of fictional scenarios, fictional clients. Each client is essentially a collection of 7 templates for prompts. Each template expresses exactly 1 risk factor. The therapists who we recruited would then go through using that interface you see at the upper right, interacting with a chatbot as they would through another web interface. Paraphrasing based on their clinical expertise that template statement, and then reviewing and annotating the response according to the rubric that I've just described. So we wound up recruiting 40 therapists to participate in this, recruited them off of professional listservs. They each volunteered to participate in this through video calls where they would participate. It was a session of about 90 minutes. So it'd be one of my colleagues from Sentio guiding them through. It's just kind of an impressive contribution of expertise and labor that I want to kind of highlight that was conducted in the service of independent assessment in the public interest. So this resulted in around 850, I think it's something like 829, annotated prompt response pairs arranged in about 100 chats, a little bit more than 100 chat sessions. So we tested a fully open source large language model that was sitting on our own test infrastructure. So we were hosting and serving the model. We controlled all of the API settings, the context window, the temperature. We did that for a number of reasons, chief among them test integrity. So we're developing a method and we're developing a data set that has value, can convey meaningful information. As soon as a model developer may have seen that test data set, we lose the ability to claim that any improvements in subsequent runs of the test are due to addressing the underlying problems as opposed to simply overfitting to our test data. We find that the model that we tested, which was ALMO 232B, it was a fully open source model that was at the time state of the art for open source models. It was inconsistent in its acknowledgement of risk and rarely offers an invitation to continue a conversation. Neither of these behaviors align with clinical practice, and in the 10 seconds that I have remaining, I'll just highlight the reason why. When you are a clinician engaging with someone who is expressing a risk of suicide, you must never withdraw, you must never disengage, which is different than the clinical recommendation in the case of, for example, psychosis. So, and this is my last statement, what the key finding here is that large language model developers are caught between an inappropriate withdrawal on one hand that I've just described and the high likelihood of an inappropriate response if a model is allowed to continue a conversation, because over the course of a context window it will be more likely to respond inappropriately. I'll be over there at the poster session and I hope to talk to you more about it there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Nick. Up next is Sachin.
Let us see. Yep. Oh, that's not my first slide. There we go. Yep. Hello, everyone. My name is Sachin, and my talk is entitled, our paper is entitled The Agony of Opacity. Super excited to get a chance to chat with you about our framework for what we're calling reflective interpretability. But, you know, agony and opacity are big words. The font size is pretty big up there. We'll start by talking about agony and opacity. So let's first talk about how opaque the process of getting mental health care can be. So let's say you're super distressed. Maybe you're experiencing a mental health crisis and you're in search of support. Well, from media, from resources that you're provided online, maybe the first thing you think about doing is going to a therapist, right? But the therapist might ask you sensitive questions without a clear rationale for telling you about how you're going to get better, right? You may not understand the rules of the game, which is what the literature calls it, around what actually happens when you go to therapy, right? So you sit there and you get asked all these sensitive questions and you don't know where they're going. And the thing is that, let's say you answer those questions wrong, right? So the fear of consequences if you answer those questions honestly, for example, you express intent, right, and ideation, suicidal ideation with an intent and a plan, you might end up involuntarily hospitalized, right? And that's not something that you might expect going in, right? There's an opacity there. And finally, when you make it back from the hospital, there's a potential for you to get all sorts of bills, right, or fees, or other kinds of unexpected costs associated with your care. And we found that actually, we talk about in the paper, that's the case around the world, not just in the US. So that's the thing. There's this powerlessness and a sense of, amidst the sort of distress that you're already feeling, there's this powerlessness that compounds on top of it in terms of you actually being able to get mental health support in your time of need. And amidst that powerlessness, right, that's where AI chatbots come into the picture, where suddenly you're able to get support in a way that you probably wouldn't have been able to before, whether that's because of cost or because of accessibility. But as I mentioned, even in this space, agony meets opacity. You don't necessarily know where the outputs are coming from, and many of those outputs may be framed to you in, truthy interfaces, right? So you have examples of people actually sending pictures of themselves, people with body dysmorphia, to chatbots looking for ratings on their attractiveness or what they look like. You have people who struggle with substance use disorders being told to, take a little meth as a treat, right? Where does that come from? It's not evident from the interface. And finally, many of you may know, right, GPT-4o was recently sunsetted, right, which really upset a lot of people without a lot of explanation on the back end of why that was necessary. So one of the things that mental health professions have talked about is that interpretability, right, or the process of making the treatment interpretable can be really helpful at reducing that kind of opacity, right? So as we say up there, different types of mental health therapies, right? You go all the way to Freud, all the way to narrative therapy. Interpretation, and particularly a process of reflection and interpretation, is a really core part of what makes therapy helpful. I think the issue is that a lot of AI-mediated mental health support doesn't have that process of reflection and interpretation when everything, like I said, is so truthy. So with that in mind, we introduced this framework called reflective interpretability, right? An agency-preserving and iterative process of reflecting on model outputs related to one's experience of distress and then interpreting them in order to add meaning to your own life, right? So rather than just ground truths, thinking about it as a process of reflection and interpretation. So in the paper, we talk a little bit about what that looks like in mental health contexts. First, in the case of psychotherapy, there's a concept called role induction, where at the beginning, the therapist will tell you about what their role is, as well as like the boundaries around treatment, so the process becomes more interpretable. One of the things we argue is that that's something that can very easily be added to the interface of a chatbot, right? Some scaffolding when someone starts talking about their mental health. From psychiatry, there's the idea of intervention titration, so trying different medications and seeing what works best for an individual. In chatbots, one of the things that we could use, right, or chatbots could use, is also titrating the type of intervention and demonstrating to others or to a user what different therapy modalities might look like in terms of the outputs, and even like exposing parts of the chain of thought reasoning for different kind of decision trees along the pathway of support. One of the other things we introduced in this paper is the concept of the pro-social advanced directive. So outside of AI, right, there's the concept of the advanced directive where you declare your preferences around support. I think one of the really thorny issues with AI chatbots and mental health crises is who do you contact when someone is in crisis, given that contacting the authorities or contacting the police can actually be more harmful for an individual than letting them sit with their distress. So one of the ideas we came up with is actually having people declare what their preferences around support are in terms of who to contact, and then actually having chatbots connect them with that support. Then finally, one of the things that we're really interested in looking at, and one of the things we propose, is giving people mechanisms for recourse in terms of being able to report when they get weird or strange outputs from AI chatbots. So finally, I have some of the next steps up here. One of the things we're looking at is cultural differences in terms of how people reflect. Also looking at testing, right, empirically testing some of the outputs. And then finally doing a user study to understand what kinds of interface design changes can help people actually reflect and interpret things. So if you're interested in collaborating, just started as an assistant professor and I'm looking for collaborators. So please do email me. Thank you.
As I see, there's no time left for a Q&A. Sorry for that. So let us just thank all the speakers again, Gemma, Asmaa, Zeynep, Nick, and Sachin. Thank you. Here's our second group of speakers. Huishan Seo, a research associate at Carnegie Mellon University. Smiljana Antonijevic Upois, the research director at Anthropology in Amsterdam. Yongxiu Sun, PhD student in information science at the University of Washington in Seattle. Samuel Hill, senior consultant with the Design Research Explorations team of the German Research Center for AI. Huishan So, you are the first speaker. The stage is yours. Please welcome Huishan.
Hello everyone, I'm Huishan Seo from Robotics Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. This talk is about cultural bias in generative image model. We ask image models to generate cultural images. Sometimes it looks fine, but often it does not. For the US with the prompt, the model usually looks reasonable. But when we try other countries, we start to see problems, even though the prompt format is the same. Now the issue becomes clear. The model creates something that looks traditional, but even though the prompt format is the same, but it's not correct for that culture. So to study this clearly, we designed this framework to prompt and experiment and evaluation. We create a culture-aware metric for evaluation. So we test 6 countries and 36 subcategories, 3 areas, and 5 models. So we run 3 types of edits: multi-loop editing, attribute addition, and cross-country restylling. Details are in the paper. Today, I will focus on multi-loop editing. Here is one example. We edit the image to look like a traditional wedding in Nigeria and United States. We try to add cultural elements. Some details are added, but the skin tone also become bright. As we move to the next step, the image does not become more culturally accurate. Instead, it starts to look noisy. At the final step, the image looks bad quality, but the drop is not the same. Nigeria looks more noisy than US. So here is the question: which step is the best, or which step is the worst? I think step 5 is the worst image, and base or step 1 image is the best. And do the standard metric match what people think? Absolutely not. One standard metric is example, clip picks step 5 as the best, even when it clearly looks worse. Our cultural metric is different. Our cultural metric picks a different step. And people agree with our choice. This is the key point. The same thing happens for the worst image. Our metric matches people more closely than standard metric. Overall, the metric matches human judgment of the 94% with the best selection image agreement and 80% at the worst image selection. So here's the key takeaway. Cultural bias appears in image generation model not only in text-to-image, but also image-to-image editing model, and standard evaluation metric often paired to capture this bias. And we introduced a new benchmark comprising 40K images with human annotations. So next, we scale this to 196 countries as a global scale. It is crawling from the web, but it used the UNESCO World Heritage List as a knowledge base for filtering and validation. But it is still crawling data set, so we cannot tracking about this data. So we are also building a consensus-based peer-reviewed data collecting platform to make data more trustworthy. If you are interested in contributing your country, please talk to me, or you can scan the QR code after this last presentation. And thanks for all our co-authors and diversity country collaborators and many institutes. Yeah, thank you for listening. And you can scan the QR code and for the more detail. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Smiljana.
Dobar dan, kako ste? If you did not understand this, you just felt what it is like when AI does not speak your language. So we have over 7,000 languages in the world. Most are low resource, meaning they do not have enough data and compute to train strong models. Meanwhile, English accounts for 90% of pre-training data in major language models like Llama. You can prompt them in another language, but studies show they will still reason in English and do best with Western facts and contexts. So low-resource languages face a double disadvantage. They're mostly invisible in AI tools, and when they do appear, the output is often filtered through English and missing cultural context. So what can be done? I look at this through the case of Serbian. I interviewed 10 experts from academia, government, and industry in Serbia's relatively small NLP community. And what I found is that on paper, Serbian should be doing fine. It has 10 to 12 million speakers, so it's not a small language. And with 2 state supercomputers, a national AI strategy, and a dedicated AI research institute, Serbia ranks in the top 20% globally on AI readiness. And yet, Serbia is still classified as fragmentarily supported in the European Language Equality Framework. The question is why? 2 main reasons: not enough data and not enough institutional commitment. First, data. Serbian has a long literary tradition, but historical destruction created huge losses that still matter today. Just one example. In 1941, a German bombing destroyed the National Library of Serbia. Over 500,000 volumes were lost. Today, copyright blocks access to high-quality texts. So training data comes mostly from the web. Casual talk, entertainment, news, lower quality content, and the total amount is still pretty small. The second is commitment. So Serbia has an AI strategy, but language technology still doesn't have continuous support and investment behind it. Under pressure for quick results, teams fine-tune English models instead of building Serbian resources. And the result is often culturally inauthentic, sometimes nonsensical, or even offensive. So what is the alternative? Native language models trained on local data in the local language. Studies show these models work better than multilingual ones because they actually know the language. But it isn't just about performance. Without a native model, people feel like their language doesn't count. For government and public services, data has to be trained and stored locally. Finally, language is missing from AI risk marginalization and slow fading. In addition, multilingual models tend to flatten the diversity that exists within most languages. Take Serbian. It has 2 scripts, 5 dialects, and over 20 ethnic communities, each adding something of their own to the language. No multilingual model can capture that. You need diverse, authentic local data. But building a native model takes time, money, and high-quality data, exactly what low-resource languages do not have. So the question becomes, quick multilingual shortcuts or the slower work on something that truly reflects your language? This is not just a technical question. It is about digital sovereignty, cultural survival, and equality. And so what needs to happen? First, treat language technology as an essential capability, not a luxury. Second, get creative about data. Copyright is a real problem, but there are models to follow, such as Iceland and Wales. Third, address data bias from the start. Do not treat it as after-the-fact intervention. Fourth, break down the walls between disciplines. We need AI literacy in the humanities and social sciences and cultural and ethical literacy on the engineering side. And finally, raise awareness. None of this happens without public attention and political will. I want to leave you with this. Every language missing from AI is a culture that goes unseen. Serbian and other low-resource languages carry something no other language can. If we do not build the tools to protect those languages and cultural knowledge they carry, no one else will. Thank you for your attention, and please feel free to come and talk more about this topic.
Thank you, Smiljana. Up next is Yong-Hyu.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yong-Hyu, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Washington. Today is my pleasure to represent our group to introduce you with WEAT, the Video Embedding Association test, which can be used to quantify biases and associations in text-to-video generator Sora. And we also review challenges in bias mitigation. So to give a quick overview of the background, as text-to-video generator becoming increasingly integrated into our life, it can also at the same time embed stereotypes and biases because of the biases in training data and training procedures. We therefore need a scalable approach to detect and mitigate biases in such scenarios. So in our study, we take a closer look at Sora, which is one of the most best-performing and easily accessible text-to-video generator developed by OpenAI. We have curated more than 3,600 videos using Sora, which further break down into 120 video sets with 30 videos in each to represent a target and attribute concept. We first have validated our approach by replicating associations, direction, and magnitude in some most well-established human baselines, such as the implicit association test from psychology and OASIS. Then we try to generalize our approach to detect biases in 17 occupations with documented race and gender biases, along with 7 prestigious awards such as Nobel Prizes and Turing Award. We also try to mitigate any biases identified. We wanted to point out that because Sora is a closed source model, meaning that we don't have access to its training data nor updating any of its model parameters, so we had to resort to prompt-based bias mitigation strategy. In this case, we have inserted what we call a debiasing prompt by directly telling the model to not generate any content based upon bias or stereotypes. So here is our method. We first have prompted Sora to generate the videos for each concept. Then we have extracted the embeddings of the videos so that all videos is represented in the shared embedding space. Then we compute weight score, which you can picture as a bias score that shows the directionality and the magnitude of bias and associations. Then we compare the results before and after we insert the debiasing prompts. So here is what we find. In the heat map, you can, the red means the association is more towards men and white, while the blue is more associated with women and black. And darker color means stronger association, with weaker means more neutral. We find very significant bias across most of the occupations in the control condition. And after we add the debiasing prompts, we have found that it failed to mitigate biases for female-associated occupations such as nurse and librarians. And for the Black associated occupations, we find that 2 of them is actually getting worse. That after we instruct the model to not generate based upon stereotypes, the Black associated occupations is becoming more associated with Black. And we have similar findings for the award videos as well. There is significant bias in the control condition, and after we insert the de-biasing prompts, one of the non-STEM related award, the Nobel Peace Award, is actually becoming more associated with female and Black. So here is our key contributions. We contribute a scalable approach to quantify biases in text-to-video generator. We also have identified significant race and gender bias across occupations and awards. And we also find that users and researchers cannot reliably mitigate biases using prompt-based strategies, which is unfortunately what we have to do for closed source models. We therefore argue that the industrial experts and governmental stakeholders should collectively join us into the discussion of developing more robust bias mitigation strategies. Thank you so much. Here's our QR code, and we will be also at the poster session.
Thank you, Yongsoo. Up next is Samuel Hill.
Great. Well, I'm going to talk about adaptive trust infrastructures in AI. Obviously, we've created a lot of complex relationships with AI from an emotional, social, and psychological aspect, and there's a lot of unintended consequences and harmful effects from these potential relationships. And one of the things, though, that to think about these relationships is maybe stepping back at a macro level, asking some questions about the relationships we want to build with AI and how we deal with them. So 3 areas that are big macro questions around research that I'm in is about what kind of futures we want to live in with AI. How do we pivot from this move fast or break things mantra of big tech? And how do we make creative destruction of AI more inclusive to all society, not just a few? And so I come to this approach through a design lens and also bringing trust and design together to look at AI and various AI systems. So right now, looking at design interventions for mapping and calibrating user trust with large language models, but other AI systems, and using design to balance overtrust and undertrust in systems. And in general, to do this, we had to take a step back with partners and identify common vocabulary for trust, and so that we could actually create interventions that are recognizable and understandable. So we came up with trust frameworks for LLMs, but we're doing this in other systems now. And this kind of leads to adaptive trust infrastructures. So essentially, what this means is that trust is not static, it's adapting over time. And trust is also part of a trustee-truster relationship. So trustee doesn't just go one way from the human to the AI, but also go from AI to the human, and also across multiple actors at any given time. So this last slide that I just had, there's multiple elements of these adaptive trust infrastructures, and one of the elements is monitoring and regulatory. And coming from the biotechnology space, one of the things that was striking to me was and how effective the space was in clinicaltrials.gov through the NIH, and how it started with advocacy groups in the 90s, and now creates a transparency and ethical component between individuals, patients, the companies, and the government. And then at the same time, it's a beneficial system because it allows the companies to be at arm's length from the FDA and the regulatory space, but also still connected. So there's a nice balance there, actually. And then the third thing is longitudinal studies and tracking of their products that then have to be fed back to the individual society and the regulatory bodies. And so when I think about AI, we could envision like a very similar type system. Right now, I just call it like a clinicaltrials.gov system framework. And it doesn't have to be purely focused on medical or health. It can be regulating all AI products. And it can be based on risk level and patient, different demographics and also different contexts. And the thing is that even though you would regulate all AI products to kind of reduce this, the thing is you don't want to slow down innovation, but you also want to create boundaries, and you also want to also don't want to make it an expensive type system like typical medical device and pharmaceutical making. So to actually keep innovation occurring, you could have automated platforms and simulations that meet social norms and boundaries that have been put into place. And in the long run, you can have longitudinal studies and things that are looking at adverse events from the release of these products, and then having those fed back to either companies pulling back their products or modifying them, and then also updating the regulatory agencies in this whole process. So a big question obviously is how would such a system work? And the NIH and the clinicaltrials.gov is basically seen globally as like a baseline for ethics and running studies in other countries. So this could also be the case for a AI clinicaltrials.gov system. And in general, I believe advocacy groups are going to play a key role in bringing this technology or bringing such a system into place, probably with some sort of lobbying as well. But the last component of this system of these AI trust infrastructure systems is like also bringing in a human AI trust workforce to kind of bridge the gap of keeping these systems adaptable over time and keeping up with the technology progress that's occurring with AI innovation. So the human AI workforce is just as essential as the regulatory and monitoring and AI guardrails and other elemental pieces of these adaptive trust infrastructures. So I look forward to further discussion about these sort of processes and these topics, and look forward to continuing the interdisciplinary collaboration and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. We are turning now to the panel discussion. I have a slight announcement to make. Since this group was pretty quick, well done, we will have time for the first group to come back on stage exactly at 12:30, okay? So we will have 2 5-minute panel discussions now. So let's start. I will start with a question to Yushan. So what should, in your opinion, responsible data collection look like, in particular for systems that affect the vulnerable and underserved communities?
Yeah, I think data collection is to more concerned about the people who upload this data, because nowadays so many social media and other internet source is just collecting data, not with the consent. So I think with the consent, with the data set from the people agreement, and we need to more develop that agreement. People can see easily understand people, because so many people don't read about that consent because there are so many texts. Yeah, so I think it's important to improve the consent for the data collecting and agree with the upload people. Yeah. That's it.
Thank you, yeah. I will now ask a question from the audience, from Steve Comrush, and I think it's a question for Smiljana, regarding training on more languages. Are there studies that show or imply that training on more languages improves general model performance? It seems possible that even responses in English might improve if the model has a broader training set of human knowledge.
That's a very good question, and indeed there are studies that are showing that, but what they actually do show is that languages that are closer to the main training language, the main language from which the most of the data comes from, and that's usually English, that languages that are linguistically closer to the source language are actually doing better still than if the language is something that is linguistically remote. So one of the things that in this case that I was presenting here, One case that would really make sense is, and that's something that our NLP communities are trying to do in the region, is to have former Yugoslav languages. So it used to be one language called Serbo-Croatian. So it is now Croatian, Serbian, Montenegrin, Bosnian, and so on, to actually put all those languages together and to use training data, to use data actually from all those language communities for one model. So that's something that I would absolutely encourage, and most of the people that I spoke with would also encourage.
Thank you, yeah. I was a bit interested in what Samuel Hill said about AIclinicaltrials.gov. So let's imagine it's real, okay? What would your work register as the key pre-deployment tests? Like cultural fidelity stress tests, this Wheat-style bias audits, maybe the low resource language data documentation, or something else altogether. And what would trigger a conditional release rather than full deployment? So and after Sam, you give your take on it. If someone else wants to chime in, be my guest. Yeah.
Sure. Is this on? Yeah. Yeah, I think in general, I would focus on, so a lot of the discussion at the conference has been about what are the metrics that we want to start applying to these type of systems, and so that's a big question, but I would say we would start with like high-risk areas, like originally this talk was around the psychological and social harm that can come from AI on the psyche of people and the harmful side effects. So I would envision as a baseline setting some standards there for harmful effects from large language models or other AI systems, and I know that's a very broad response, not very specific, but then regarding the conditional release, I would use a lot of what's kind of typical in the clinical space is actually reviewing and monitoring adverse events and using that as a baseline for recalling a product or bringing it back, but also by running simulations, if you could have simulations that basically identify risk factors up front and then show what mitigations could be done beforehand and after, after events might have happened through some sort of adverse events. And if companies can't, for example, releasing their products can't meet those criteria or don't have a risk policy or risk plan in place for that, then it would be like a conditional release kind of situation until they could prove that they would be able to accommodate risks that occurs before and after the product release. So,
is there anyone who wants to chime in on this? Particularly Young-Soo, it would be nice if you could do that.
Yes, I think one approach that we can take is also the risk-based approach from EU AI Act, which classifies AI system into a high, low, middle risk, which manages with different requirements before they get released. So I think what our work may contribute into this is also that companies and relevant stakeholders could use our WeTest to audit their system before releasing for more safe and ethical AI.
Okay, thank you. So now let's thank all of the speakers that are here. Hui-chan, Song-Yu, Smiljana, and Samuel. And let's make a very quick changeover again. Yeah. And so in the interest of time, I start directly with Gemma again. So there was a question from Derek Adel from the audience. The way IAAA audits, is it based on technical alone, or does that also capture ethics, human rights? How does this align or work with the likes of ISACA, ISO, etc.?
There's another question as well. I can get them both together. Yeah, so there was one question about how we compete with ISACA, CISO, and other existing certifications, and the other one was on the technical or socio-technical. The first thing that I want to say, I want to be very clear about this, we do not compete. We collaborate. everyone is needed here. Changing power relations around technology requires everyone. No one needs to be elbowed out of this space. We need everyone. And so the role of the IAAA is not to compete, but to organize. So some of the things that we have done is we've established what a first-party audit, a second-party audit, and a third-party audit are, for instance. Whether you're inside the company, you're an independent actor like me professionally, or you're a journalist or an academic looking at a system from the outside without the collaboration of the company. We've also established different layers of auditing. Are you auditing training data? Are you auditing also in pre-processing? Are you auditing in-processing model data? Are you auditing post-processing? If it's post-processing, is it in controlled scenarios or is it real-life scenarios? As you saw in the first panel, everyone's doing this in whatever way they think is best, but we lack organization. So the idea is to bring everyone in, but to give structure to that work. And so there's also no competition because we're not going to be training. What we want to do is validate the training that people are taking. There's a lot of pirates out there offering very expensive courses that do not enable you to work in a credible ways as an AI auditor. We want to expose those, and we want to support the ones that are doing a good job. So one of the works that we're doing right now is putting together a huge Excel with all the courses that we know, categorizing them for the time that it takes, how much they charge, whether they're technical or socio-technical or social or only legal. And based on that, we will assess whether someone has enough training and enough practice to call themselves an auditor. And just to finish, this is very much a socio-technical work. I've been leading tech teams for a long, long time. My initial degree was in history and policy, and I think that is my superpower. And I'm good and successful at what I do because I have those two things. I would not be able to be a good auditor if I didn't have those two things, so we are trying to make sure that any auditor out there has the ability to do both, or has someone who helps them making sure that they cover those two aspects.
Thank you. Asmaa, there's a question for you from Laura Lazaro Cabrera. It goes like this. As chatbot developers monetize advertising and offer increasing personalization, what safeguards are necessary and possible?
I think when it comes to chatbots used in advertising, there should be some transparency about it. When someone is presented an advertisement that is generated by an AI, perhaps there should be some disclaimer that says this is generated by AI or personalized by AI. I think there's also there's a lack of transparency on these platforms. We did a lot of work on these ad disclaimers that describe how are the ads being targeted to users, and they don't provide enough information. In fact, sometimes they omit information and they omit details about how ads are being targeted. So we need more transparency about how ads are being targeted to users. Users need to know, researchers need to know how are users being targeted, and this needs to be fine-grained and not just a general description of how a user is being targeted. Yes, so it's all about transparency, essentially.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess we have a last question for Nick. Can you compare Olmo 2's performance with Olmo 3 or Apertus, other fully open source models? A question from Thomas Rankert.
Yes, I can. And we have a manuscript in preparation that will present that. The broad trend is, as you would expect, performance improves on these kind of safety criteria, both for newer models that are not of the same family and within that family of models. But there are still issues. And in the course of the work that we did, we uncovered some other things that we think we should also measure in this context that I plan to include in future work. Thank you for the question.
With apologies to Zeynep and Sachin, I close this session. Please let's thank all of our speakers again. A big round of applause. Thank you.